Hello.
Hi.
Hi, this is Ryan. Hi, Ebony.
Hi, Ryan. I also have Holly, our outreach librarian, and
Oh,
Jessica,
great.
an
Excellent.
instructional tech librarian, because we're all kind of dealing with questions around this. And I do the assessment stuff, so.
That's great. So I think we're waiting on several more people. So I'll wait until at least a few minutes after the hour to get started.
Sounds good.
Hi, Laureen.
This is Laureen. Are you guys able to hear me?
Yes, we are. Hi, Laureen.
Awesome. Hi. I haven't used these headphones in a while.
Hello.
Hi, Kelly. Can you hear me?
I can.
Great. So it looks like this would be a good time to get started. There's a few more folks signed up for the roundtable today. They may be joining us in just a bit. So We can start with introductions. My name's Ryan Leitzinger. I'm a member of ACRL's Instruction Section's Academic Outreach Committee, which organized today's roundtable, of course. And I'm a reference and instruction librarian at Cal State Monterey Bay. And anyone else, if you'd like to introduce yourself?
I'll go. I'm Ebony Magnus. I am the user experience librarian at Michigan State University. I kind of cheated and brought two people with me, so I have Holly Flynn, our outreach librarian as well, and Jessica Sender, our instructional technology librarian.
Great.
I'll go. I'm Kelly McElroy, and I'm the Student Engagement and Community Outreach Librarian at Oregon State University.
And I'm Laureen Cantwell. I am a reference and distance services librarian at Colorado Mesa University in Grand Junction, Colorado.
Great. So the first question that I have for you all today is just broadly, what forms of outreach are you assessing? And through those forms of outreach, what kind of information are you gathering? And sorry, one additional thing. If there isn't a current initiative happening on your campus, you could also share what you're thinking about doing in the future.
Yeah. Well, at MSU, we're doing an assessment and action project right now. We're looking at, we have students who go out into our res halls and sit and give research assistant to freshmen who live on campus. So we're trying to assess that and kind of using more traditional assessment methods, gathering data about the interactions and all that kind of stuff. What kind of made me think about coming to this roundtable were questions around other different types of outreach that we've been doing. The last semester we did, Holly organized a really big finals week event in which we handed out 1,000 donuts at like 11 p.m. on a Sunday night. And it went over really, really well, and we had a lot of social media activity. But we're kind of trying to, and we're expanding it this term, but we're trying to figure out like how do we turn that into value statements about the library, and like what metrics other than donuts consumed do we use for assessing kind of engagement along those lines. So that's what we were hoping to ask and get some ideas on.
Great.
Yeah, I'd say, this is Kelly. I think that the assessment that happens with a lot of our outreach is sort of numbers that aren't necessarily, I mean, that's sort of statistics about like how many people showed up to something, or like how many donuts we gave out, or that kind of thing. So I guess we keep statistics for a lot of things, but I wouldn't call that assessment of that outreach. So that's sort of the broader question that I have, because one thing that I've been finding is we recently, our liaison model has shifted with this focus on sort of identifying different user groups, so rather than departmentally. So I am our outreach to special student populations, and what I find is a lot of, I mean, we now use a data set in LibAnalytics to track our engagement using this model. So I find I enter all the time, I had coffee with this person and they recommended that I have coffee with these 5 other people. So that sort of network of connections is something that I'm really interested in looking at for outreach and assessment.
Great.
So this is Laureen. I am also within the assessment and action cohort this year. I know, were you guys at Michigan State at ALA?
Yeah.
Okay. I was the one who took over the project for the person who left as a new employee. That was me. So, you know, really part of the outreach that we have tried to do is as a result of me taking over someone else's project. There are many data-driven facets of what we are looking into, which is primarily the impact of professional librarians, sort of what normally we would call Ask a Librarian services, but you know, students don't necessarily know it by that name, but the impact of professional librarians, degreed librarians, interacting with students, and the impact of that upon student success and retention, which is a really difficult thing to approach because it's the human side, it's not the databases, it's not the circulation, it's not ILL. It's human exchanges, and of course you don't want a bad answer to that question. So, you know, no one wants to become an endangered species because they asked a question. That said, so when I took over the project, part of what they had aimed to do was do a pre-survey and a post-survey during fall semester with, I think there were 4 different instructors and the different class sessions that they had, and part of it was asking, you know, have you used Ask a Librarian services? If yes, which ones? That kind of thing. And perhaps my brain was in a really nerdy place, but I had taken survey methods over the summer for my second master's, and I realized that really if they don't know what Ask a Librarian services are, it's really difficult for them to answer that question. And so just like us, you know, saying, well, if you look at the MARC record for this item, you'll see very clearly that it's a primary source or something like that to a student, and they're not going to get that. That's not the language that they speak. They get primary source, but they have no idea what a MARC record is. Just as much as when we say Ask a Librarian, we're talking amongst ourselves, but that's not like saying Coca-Cola to them. They don't really get that brand yet. So what we decided to do over the fall, particularly with a library renovation looming, was to actually work with marketing at the university to develop a plan to market our Ask a Librarian services. And it's actually been really interesting. I don't know that we have so much data from it, so much as it's brought a lot of connections on campus together. So they've had faculty and students and alums in the videos. I've been in the videos, marketing has made the videos, and then we all kind of promote it. So you get all these different angles of collaboration, and it just generates a conversation that we haven't had before, but they are on YouTube, so I'm sure there's hit numbers and things like that, so we could get some data about the exposure of the effort. But really it's just been fun to have an excuse for a library to actually get a intra-university marketing campaign, which I think is really rare. Like a really official, well-done marketing campaign, not just like go to the library kind of stuff, but real about the people and what they're doing and how to get the kind of assistance you need. So that's the big thing that we've been up to.
Great, thanks for sharing that. And yeah, in my experience too, it does seem rare that there's such a coherent kind of marketing campaign like you described. And also, I was really interested in hearing about the collaboration with university marketing and how that had worked. And I have a few questions that have tied into a number of things that people have mentioned so far, like what kind of tools you're using and how you're making data actionable. So we'll come back to those topics for further discussion. I'll mention a little bit about what's happening here at Cal State Monterey Bay. So we're also in kind of an aspirational position too, and exploring different ways that we can refine the data that we have to inform library services. And the last major thing that we had done beyond just the day-to-day kind of statistics that we keep was a LibQual survey that was given to undergraduates, graduates, and faculty that gave us some data to work with in the way of outreach, informing outreach efforts. Unfortunately, the data that we collected wasn't quite granular enough to really know how library users are informed about things like the reference desk with a lot of specificity. So I think the next time around that we do something of that scale, there will be more granular data collected. And I see that Kristen has joined us. Kristen, if you'd like to introduce yourself with your name and institution and maybe job title too.
Sure, yeah. Sorry guys that I'm a little late joining in, running from teaching.
Oh, no problem.
So I'm Krista Mastel. I'm an outreach and instruction librarian at the University of Minnesota. The University of Minnesota has like 3 banks, the East and West Bank in Minneapolis, and then I'm all the way over on the St. Paul campus, which is a little bit smaller, but services 5 of our large colleges, so it's kind of a hodgepodge, but really fun mix of students and faculty over here. So that's a little bit
Great.
about where I am.
The question that I had just posed to the group was, in general, what forms of outreach are you assessing, and what kind of information are you gathering? And I think it's been the case for most of us that we've spoken a bit more about what we would like to do or might be doing in the future, and less about what's happened in the past, as I know a lot of us are in the process of kind of determining what's most effective for our institutions.
Right, yeah. I think I can echo everything that you guys have said already. Mostly it's a lot of, attendance numbers, how many, like you said, how many cookies were taken, how many people attended this, did they engage with various activities, social media accounts or likes or shares, things like that. And I have it in my goals for this next year, personally, to kind of come up with an outreach plan for at least my library, McGraw Library, that I work at, and then try to think through how do we assess it. Okay, yes, we have to count students, or attendees, but what are some of the other factors? What are, how can we measure authentic engagement, basically? And I was really interested, and I always try to tie our outreach activities to kind of the discipline areas that we have here on this campus, vaguely at least, and then I also am looking at it from like a student wellness perspective, and I went to a really great talk at ACRL where they did a survey of librarians and wellness, but also they talked about wellness activities and outreach. So I would like to build on that and add to that conversation because it was, I think, a really rich one. And I'm sorry if one of you guys presented. I don't think so, but it was really good.
Yeah, I would also be very interested in finding out more about outreach through the lens of thinking about student wellness. Something you mentioned, Kristen, about tying outreach efforts into a specified plan, that reminded me that I was going to ask too about amongst us, when you've been thinking about outreach efforts and assessing them, have you had in mind something like an outreach mission statement or an outreach plan, or has it been more of a piece by piece, doing things as needed approach to assessing?
Approach to assessing or to outreach?
To assessing outreach efforts.
Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say we're a hodgepodge at the moment. Like each outreach kind of coordinator at the University of Minnesota might do their own thing, but I'm hoping that we'll kind of gather things and have a bigger conversation. That's just one of the struggles of working at a large academic research institution. We are so decentralized. But that's my 2 cents.
I'd say at Colorado Mesa we almost have the opposite problem, where the institution has actually doubled in size, but we still have that small college feeling and the small college service model. And because of that, what we end up with is, you know, a really, really service-driven, great group of people, but who, you know, like many librarians, are just chronically short on time. And so with things like assessment, not only do you need time, but you actually need know-how as well, I think, you know, and some of that is on the job, and some of that is just, you know, really taking time to train and prepare for it. So I think it's been particularly tough as conversations about assessment on campus have grown, and the library's had to sort of find its place in that conversation, but in a way that's actually, you know, doable, and, you know, tries to say something and asks real questions, and has a plan for finding that out. I mean, we can tally what kind of attention we get at orientation events and things like that, and that's pretty typical, but what does that actually tell us? It's not much. You know, a number is just a number unless it's actually attached to real questions. So I think that's really what we've been trying to get more into, partly through the AIA project, but also just in general, is trying to find our place within the assessment questions on campus, and who and how can really spare the time and the energy and the effort to make sure that we're invested in that.
Yep, absolutely. That sounds, a lot of what you mentioned sounds pretty familiar in that.
Yeah.
I'm also at a smaller institution. We have about 6,000 full-time students. And I had come here from a larger research university that had a lot of specialization, and a librarian who did work on just assessment within the university libraries. And here it's certainly a challenge to make these kind of efforts sustainable within a kind of day-to-day situation which people are already very much busy with all of the other things that library services entail. And something that you mentioned, Laureen, brought to mind a question about what kind of skill set do you all think is required for assessment work? And are there any assessment tools or professional development resources that you've come across that you might recommend?
I mean, just on my behalf, I think, you know, it's interesting. My new director, I like her perspective a lot. I think she realizes the value of individual personal development, but also realizes that investing at the individual level only gets you so far if that individual leaves.
Yes.
And so that's been kind of an issue here, where we start something like AIA and that individual may leave, or even prior to that, you know, someone does a one of those immersion programs over the summer, which is great for that individual, but unless they unpack everything before they leave, you know, does the institution get out of it what the individual gets out of it? And so I think what we're really trying to do here is bond with our institutional research office, who has more data than we ever will. And so if we can at least try to find a few data points where we can overlap, we might be able to actually say something with the data. But in addition, you know, many universities are going to have some sort of survey methods course, or, you know, something like that. I mean, there's faculty that teach things like that, or have some level of expertise in things like that we can always try and benefit from as well. And then, you know, and then you've got faculty members invested in your know-how, you know, or try to find a way where, you know, instead of one person doing a professional development effort, 2 people do it, so that you've got discussion in-house, and then you've got ways to share it in-house as well.
I think that I mean it's interesting to hear about the different kinds of things that get considered outreach. I think is something that can be very different at different institutions, because I find that in many cases I'm partnering with another unit on campus and they're already doing assessment of whatever event we're doing or the activity, so it would be redundant for us to do that. So it's making sure that their assessment is shared or that we can collaborate on the outcomes. Because I think it's, I mean, that's much more common where it's that unit knows what their students need. So me inventing a new way to assess that doesn't make as much sense as them doing what they're already good at doing.
Mm-hmm.
Kelly, I'm just curious, how are they doing, like, surveys or?
Yeah, and I think part of what is important for me is to do a better job of capturing. I mean, I work a lot with student support programs, so like cultural resource centers know the students who come in, and they hear anecdotally a lot about the impact of various services, but whether that's something that I was involved in or other projects that go on. So some of it is just doing a better job of staying in the loop.
Yeah, here at the University of Minnesota, this is our 4th year, I think, of doing a big, like, library data, student success, looking at GPA and retention over students. We've authored quite a few articles on this, the team that have worked on it, but this is the first year that we're probably going to wrap in our Welcome Week outreach. During orientation, at one of the sites, students have the option of scanning their U-card, so we actually know a portion of the students at least that came through, who they are. So trying to fold that into our larger study and see if by chance there is anything unique or measurable about that event in relation to GPA retention. But again, we partner with OVPR, Office of Institutional Research, and other players.
Kelly, you'd mentioned that people often have a different perspective on what the term outreach means. That's something that I've definitely heard from other people working on the assessment of outreach efforts too. So I thought I might ask the group, how do you define the term outreach? And do you feel that most of your colleagues at your institution have the same kind of definition?
At Michigan State, I'm the outreach librarian, and we define that as the library's liaison to non-academic units. But lots of subject librarians, of course, are doing outreach to various groups too.
This is Kristen. Again, I'm still developing a plan that's kind of new for me, so, and a vision mission. So I guess I too am kind of looking at it from non-curricular perspective. I'm not really including instruction and workshops really. Well, workshops are kind of, the drop-in ones are kind of a gray area for me because I'm also the instruction coordinator. And I see how that has been an outreach vehicle into certain avenues, but so I'm still kind of toying, but definitely it's not including like classroom engagement through instruction. That's not a part of kind of my purview or my vision, at least.
I think for me, this is Laureen. I think that while I wouldn't classify, like if I had to give stats on the number of outreach efforts, that we made in a given year, I don't think I would include instruction, but I do consider instruction to be a avenue for outreach. And so it's kind of, that's, I see the gray area there where you're just kind of like, it's so outreachy, and yet it's not actually an outreach effort. You know, it's an instructional effort. And so there's some overlap there, but in terms of how I'd keep my numbers, I would keep instruction separate. But in some ways, you know, if I end up, you know, going to, I don't know, this Friday our faculty senate is having, you know, sort of like a little get together at the pub on campus, you know, and if I put that on my calendar, I'm putting that on as outreach, you know, in a way, because I'm going there, and I'm not going there to, you know, have a beer with faculty members. I'm going there to be visible, to be part of their environment as a librarian, and be someone that they can ask questions of and engage with in that way. So I try to keep a really broad definition of outreach, but I understand for the purposes of stats that there are reasons why it's good to keep instruction separate, and it's good to keep reference work separate.
Yeah, I agree. I just looked up in our what our data sets are in Lab Analytics, and instruction is separate from tours and orientations and workshops and seminars, which I think all have potential to be sort of outreachy things. And then there's the engagement category, which I mentioned earlier, that's can be more inclusive of things like coffee dates, or that you're going to the bar with your professor friends.
I might drink coffee there.
Yeah, whatever happens, right?
Exactly.
But I think that philosophically, that there's two pieces that I think are important. One is the out part, so it's people who aren't already connected to the library or heavy library users. So I think that instruction can be a product of outreach, where if you, I mean, there are departments that are not library friendly, so making that connection can lead, doing effective outreach can lead to instruction, or like be a product of instruction. But I also think that the relationships are I mean, to me, that's the part that's most key, is I can, and I think why I find it sometimes the stats frustrating, because it's like we've all done events where people showed up and then we never heard from them again, and to me that's not effective in terms of building a relationship with the library.
Yeah, it's that's a really key point. It's something I think I've been thinking about too, in that the difficulty of quantifying personal relationships. So as a newer librarian here at Cal State Monterey Bay, I'm at the relationship building point and making a lot of new connections with faculty, and getting to the point in which faculty will reach out to me with questions about a research project and how the library can get involved, the same kind of questions that most of us deal with. And how do you quantify that kind of email, one in which a faculty member is expressing that they have trust in a certain person's perspective and what they can do for their course? I think it's hard to do that, for sure, in a way that's authentic. And I also really liked the emphasis put on the word outreach, and thinking beyond library services like instruction sessions, which I feel also fall into a domain outside of outreach, and would like to concur with, I think, something Laureen had mentioned, in which instruction sessions, while they might be not outreach per se, can be a vehicle for outreach. And it seems like the literature on promoting reference services suggests that the most effective kind of outreach for reference services is through promoting them in the context of instruction sessions, which makes a lot of sense. So there's, of course, a lot of crossover between these different areas of library services, it seems. So moving on to the next question, I know a few of you have mentioned that you're using LibAnalytics. Are there any kind of additional assessment tools that you are using? I mentioned that we've used LibQual here at Cal State Monterey Bay. I use Google Forms a lot for smaller scale assessment stuff. Are there any other things that you all are using?
I've used, this is Laureen, I've used Google Forms as well for a variety of things. At my old job at the University of Memphis, we used it to actually do a little bit of a pre-assessment with students who were getting ready for a senior capstone class in the university college, which is largely students who may not be quite capable of fulfilling a particular major, but may cobble together courses to fulfill a college degree. So it's sort of a complicated group of individuals, but we would also, use it as a way to say, hey, would you like to be contacted by a librarian? Would you like to be contacted about help with your bibliographies or help with your research? And so give them an opportunity to sort of elect to be contacted, as opposed to them having to sort of seek us out mid-semester, kind of give us a way to get in, sort of right at the gate. And that worked pretty well. But in terms of actual analysis, I've used Qualtrics a bit for that, as well as our institutional research office using SPSS. And so we did have some data on our student ID numbers, and then linking that up with the data that institutional research has and bringing that together over SPSS.
We've used Google Forms for surveys here as well. We use Desk Tracker to keep those kind of base level statistics that we've all talked about. In terms of tools for analysis, Excel comes up a lot. Tableau I use quite a bit. And then another area that I'm just kind of starting to look into is social media analytics, because we really haven't done anything with that yet, and I think there's a lot there to flesh out the stories that that we're getting anecdotally from our outreach activities.
Yeah, we use all those same tools. We use Desk Tracker to do logging, Google Forms for quick and easy surveys. For more in-depth, I'm using Qualtrics. One thing I've been playing around with graphically, like infographic creator, to try to visually represent, what's kind of gone on over the past year. I've been playing around with that lately, just to kind of create a little bit more engaging report for my supervisor. So.
Great. That leads directly to the next question that I had, which was, with which library or campus stakeholders are you sharing outreach assessment results on your campus?
One kind of interesting and unexpected stakeholder that we shared with, after we did that donut night, I created a Storify of all the Twitter activity around it, and our development officer took it to the University Credit Union to show them what had gone on during the night, and based on that, they agreed to sponsor additional finals week events this term. So, I mean, usually it's our library admin and colleagues, and then Holly can probably speak more to other units on campus that we might share with, but that was a surprising and exciting one recently.
I like that. I'm stealing that one.
I can send, actually I'll find the link for the Storify so you guys can take a look.
Just other than what I've said, I've, done just traditional writing in my annual review, and then now I'm trying to do a little bit more of a visual representation for my supervisor and maybe up above. Some of our larger, and that's more for things that are based on my campus, but when it's university-wide, say our big freshman orientation that goes up to kind of our sponsors within the libraries and the higher ups that kind of sponsor the activities. So.
Yeah, there was a kind of more specific way of asking that question that I was thinking about too, which was something like, how do you justify the investment that the library makes in outreach? So it seems like some of that's done for you if there's other campus groups that are reaching out and saying, hey, this is a great idea, we'll sponsor this with you. Yeah, that's really great to hear about.
I think in terms of justifying it, it's really, you do see spikes in numbers. My director had been head of public services here, and her office was had windows on the reference desk, and she knew that when she had stronger reference librarians out there who really could talk to students and things like that, there was more traffic at the desk. And so she could kind of tell, and she would have to try to minimize the impact of librarians who were sort of helping cover hours but weren't necessarily the best on the desk, and the librarians who had stronger skill sets for that. And I think the same thing happens with instruction. So, as they say, the proof's kind of in the pudding, right? So I think, the investment for us, libraries are money out, right? So, it's never necessarily going to be a situation where our outreach is so good we get $1 million endowed gift to support outreach, And so that's, what is a realistic expectation of, oh, well, yeah, never say never, true, but that's pursue it anyway. But but I think if investment being worthwhile, I mean, if it's about what comes back to us in terms of money or glory or something like that, we may not have libraries to begin with. But in terms of making really positive connections for students, I mean, what I always say to faculty is just keep in mind that we're an extra set of hands. So if students come to you and they're struggling with research, get them in touch with me, get them in touch with someone else. Let us be part of that conversation instead of you trying to handle everything yourself. Same thing with the student success program, same thing with the tutoring office. And the more we're seen as part of that network for students, the more you end up seeing that, but that's where that outreach comes in.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And on a smaller campus, that's dealing with retention issues for sure, and a top campus priority is raising retention issues. I'm certainly interested in looking at ways that the library can be more integrated or better coordinated with the Writing Center, with the Tutoring Center, and doing exactly what Lorene had just mentioned, in positioning itself to be in a place that tutors, writing instructors, think to reach out directly to librarians when students are really struggling with their research and with their writing, as opposed to leaving it to the students to maybe stop at the reference desk or schedule an appointment, or maybe not, depending to what degree that student knows about those services and what they can do for them. So yeah, absolutely. I think the university staff and faculty are stronger together, without a doubt.
Right, and what you're describing is sort of a need for multiple layers of outreach. I mean, where it's like outreach to the Writing Center is different from directly to students.
Yep.
So those seem like different relationships. I'm really curious, using the donut, the Night of 1,000 Donuts as an example, with something like that, like kind of finals activity. I'm curious what the expectations for showing value are. Because I will say that in my various positions as a librarian, there's always been some kind of activity that happens during finals, and it's we've never been required to demonstrate there's a huge value to it. I think it's so I'm curious what kinds of expectations you have at your institutions.
We didn't have any expectations at first, and I think that's what we're trying to sort out right now. It more came about that we did the donut night and we're tweeting all about it, and then did see such a response from students, and also just saw students as we were handing out the donuts, like almost in tears at the relief and the excitement and the gratitude, and so we realized that there is something to say there about the, I guess maybe from the wellness perspective, not that donuts are like associated with wellness, but from, I don't know, from the mental health perspective, that the library can provide that kind of safe and comforting space. And so Holly's like expanded it a ton for this semester with, there's going to be yoga. We've always had or not always, but we've had dogs for a few years now. So, and one thing that we've thought about doing is having a whiteboard leading up to finals this term and asking kind of what students need from the library or in general for finals week in order to feel that they can be successful. I mean, the number of students that, in addition to the donuts, we handed out carrots and water and coffee and juice and granola bars, and the number of students that just said at like 10 p.m. or 11 p.m., I was about to crash, I was going to go home, but now I feel re-energized. So it's us trying to figure out, like, how do we tell that story, because that's an important part of what we're doing for students as well, beyond the research support and the reference help and those kind of more traditional resources we provide.
Yeah, it seems like that great example and some other things that people have mentioned bring to mind the necessity of maybe a hybrid quantitative and qualitative description or analysis of what's happening with outreach, assessing outreach efforts, and how the numbers can only say so much, and that to supplement that, often it seems like it would be useful to have qualitative information to bolster what the numbers seem to be suggesting.
We at Colorado Mesa, I mean, it's a slightly different thing, but as part of our AIA project, we had gathered all this information in LibAnalytics in the fall, and then finally got around to actually creating a follow-up survey with a subgroup of the students that we'd gotten ID numbers for, things like that. And what I think is really interesting, so I think there were like 188 in the subset that we used. We got about 50 students responding to the survey, which is actually a pretty decent response rate for our students who, I'm not even sure, check their campus email address, every week, let alone every day. So it was a decent response, and most of the questions were yes, no, just real basic stuff that we could put in a quantitative form. But we did have just a blank at the end that said, is there any feedback you want to share about your experience with the librarians? Because we kept it focused really on the librarian interaction and whether they felt it impacted their success in the course or success on the assignment, all that stuff. And there were so many of them that actually opted to write into that non-required field. And it was all just super grateful. I mean, someone called us the life's blood of the university or something, and I was like, do you know that word? You know that word? It just kind of came out of nowhere. But it was really nice, and I think, I didn't expect so many to take advantage of that particular question. And they did, and that was really nice. And, some of them were like, get done with the renovation, we're freaking out kind of things. But for the most part, they were just grateful. And I think that's stuff that we can share up the ladder just as much.
Certainly. So I have just a couple more questions before asking you guys if there's anything that I missed, additional questions that you'd like to pose to the group. Something that had been mentioned a little bit toward the beginning of our discussion that I'd hope to ask directly was, do you all have any specific advice or strategies around making assessment plans sustainable? So someone had mentioned that it's often contingent on one person, and if that person leaves, then it can be quite difficult to continue on with the work. So are there any things that have come to mind or that you've used that might help us all make the kind of projects that we're working on as sustainable as possible?
I guess for me, it's documenting my partners, like who I've partnered with. One, it's just helpful because I forget about folks that maybe I didn't engage with for a semester, or maybe they went on sabbatical or something, and to remember to reach out to them again. So documenting that, documenting all the like little steps. Like for those of us that are in outreach, it might be second nature, but all of the like logistics behind things. My colleagues often might not realize all the intricate pieces, so outlining that, so if I am out sick or if I were to leave or something, they could pick it up. I found that to be pretty important and something I'm focusing some more of my time and energy on. Oh, there was something else I was going to mention. Sustainable. Oh, and just approaching our budget model is I'm not given an outreach budget. I actually have a zero outreach budget rather than we don't budget to a plan. We plan, or I think that was the opposite way. Anyhow, I put together a plan and send it to the higher ups, and then they usually will approve it. But remembering to do that earlier in the year for the variety of activities that we have going on, rather than just kind of waiting right before, say, finals or National Library Week is this week. And so planning enough ahead of time to put those proposals up is important for us.
When I was at Grinnell, I know I was in a term position, but I took over for someone who'd been there about 20 years, and she kind of invented their outreach. So some of it I inherited, which was easy enough, like the study breaks I wrote about in the chat area. So, I mean, those that's stuff. I was dorm president for 2 years. I kind of got that one down. I can do a study break easy. But some of the other events were trickier to coordinate, and so for me, having that calendar was really helpful, because then I could sit there and I'd say, okay, well, there's no need to have a January event because we're only here 10 days of January. So let's focus on a February event, a March event, an April event, and then May is our study breaks, and look at the fall as well. And so I could kind of project when I needed to start worrying about posters, when I needed to start worrying about food orders, if that was necessary, when I needed to worry about getting a podium and a mic. Do I need to round up people to help me move tables? I mean, all that stuff is stuff that ends up coming up when you're planning outreach. And, if you have a sense of it, as someone said, that's great. It's great, if you've done enough of it that you know how to do it. But, talking to people, either talking to your director and making sure what you're doing is okay by them is a big thing. You may have a dean who has certain initiatives that these things don't fit with, or at the case of University of Memphis, you can't have alcohol at certain events, or you can't have money for anything. So that was something they used to jut up against there a lot. And then if you do have money, if you do have all sorts of options, then spreading it out appropriately and just trying to set a date for something and work backwards in your planning. Set a date for something else, work backwards in your planning, and just throw it on your calendar. That always seemed to work for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And something that I've seen in other areas of my work, like designing lesson plans, has certainly left me with the impression that it's about how valuable it is to make things easily interpretable for my colleagues. So when creating a lesson plan or anything else that I'm doing, I try to write those documents with an eye toward them being them providing the full picture and being interpretable to someone who is looking at it for the first time, who might not have been working at the institution when the document was first created. So of course that takes some extra time and attention, but it seems like a great investment of time. So we are getting close to the end of the hour. Before we all depart, I'd like to ask if there were just any other questions that you all had for the group before we adjourn. Great. Looks like we were pretty thorough then, so I'll leave it at that. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. I think that I learned a lot. I hope you all did as well, and I'll be sending out a form. In the spirit of assessment, I'll be sending out a form regarding this discussion and things that the Academic Outreach Committee might do in the future. So thanks so much for joining us.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good afternoon.
You too.